Hey guys, tonight we're heading to ancient Egypt. Not the pyramid climbing, curse dodging, tomb looting version you've seen in movies, but something quieter, dustier, and ink stained. You're waking up in the home of a scribe, surrounded by half finished scrolls, sharpened reeds, and the rich, earthy smell of ground pigments. Sunlight filters through a reed curtain, drawing golden lines across the clay floor, and in the corner, a little pot of ink waits like it's daring you to dip in. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. Between the heat, the sandstorms, and the pressure of possibly messing up a royal decree with one crooked glyph, this career path is not for the faint of heart. But you're brave, or at least too sleepy to protest. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world we're all nodding off together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink away sleep in a simple mud brick house nestled on a quiet side street of ancient Thebes. The room is small but orderly, and everything smells faintly of ink, beeswax, and dry papyrus. A cat slips past your legs unimpressed with your presence and settles beside a stack of scrolls. Your host, a mid-level scribe named Panesi, greets you with a tired nod. He's already dressed in a clean linen kilt, his fingers smudged with black. Today, you'll be helping him with something deceptively simple, preparing writing tools, pens, ink, and that all-important papyrus. You're not expected to be good at it, just try not to snap anything sacred. Panesi pulls out a fresh sheet of papyrus and lays it flat on a smooth board. You watch as he brushes off the dust with a strip of soft linen, because even the gods don't like sandy scrolls. He hands you a reed pen that's seen better days. The tip is dull, the shaft split. You'll need to carve your own, he says with a yawn. But first, we collect. Together you walk toward the banks of the Nile as the sun climbs lazily into the sky. Birds skim the water's surface, and reed beds rustle with a gentle breeze. Nearby children chase frogs. Farmers unload baskets of figs. Everything is quiet, humming alive. You kneel by the shore and run your fingers along the base of a tall green reed. It's stiff, but not brittle. Panesi shows you how to test for flexibility. Too soft and it bends when writing. Too dry and it shatters. You select one that seems just right and cut it carefully at the base. The pen, he explains, must come from the Nile. It is sacred, not just practical, just like the ink you'll mix and the surface you'll write on. Everything in this process is rooted in the landscape, born from river plant and stone. Back at his house, you lay out your reeds and take a knife to one. Slowly, gently, Panesi guides you through the shaping strip. The outer husk cut an angled tip, then slit the point just enough to hold ink. It's like whittling with a purpose. You make a mistake twice. On the third try, the reed sighs under your fingers in quiet approval. Meanwhile, he prepares the papyrus. Strips of the papyrus plant soaked and pressed into sheets, glued with sap and flattened beneath heavy stones. The sheets crackle faintly as they're rolled and unrolled, a reminder that writing here is never silent. Even the paper has a voice. As mid-morning sun spills across the courtyard, you sit together sharing a bowl of barley porridge, sweetened with dates. You glance again at the inkpot nearby filled with soot-gum Arabic and Nile water. The brush of history is only a dip away. Panesi leans back and smiles faintly. The pen, he says, is the tongue of the gods. You nod, trying not to drip porridge onto your tunic. He gestures at your new reed. That one may yet whisper something holy. And so begins your first day with the very first pen. You're back at the edge of the Nile, kneeling in the silt with your hands brushing through a forest of reeds. The morning mist still clings to their stalks, cool and damp, and somewhere a heron lets out a gravelly complaint. Panesi crouches beside you, running his thumb along a thick reed's outer skin like a baker testing dough. These, he says, are the good ones. Sedge or rush, but always from the river. It turns out choosing a writing reed isn't just about aesthetics. It's about durability, ink absorption, and split resistance under pressure. The Nile Delta is the ancient world's art supply store, and scribes have their favorites. You cut a few stems carefully with a curved blade, watching the white pulp ooze slightly from the base. Inside, the fibers are soft and moist, easy to carve, once dried, but not too quickly. Panesi bundles them and ties them loosely with a strip of flax. We'll hang them in the shade, he says. Sun makes them brittle. Back in the courtyard, you lean the bundle against a mud brick wall and take in the rhythm of life around you. A neighbor rolls sheets of papyrus, another grinds wheat, and somewhere nearby, a child recites glyphs in a sing-song voice. The city hums, but quietly, like a temple full of murmured prayers. Panese lets the reeds rest and instead opens a leather satchel lined with slits, each holding a reed pen at a different stage of life. Some are worn smooth with use, others newly sharpened. Each one has its own character, he tells you. Some for bold strokes, others for whispers. He hands you one marked with a red line. This one, he says, was used to sign a grain ledger for the temple. Took 3 hours. It deserves a break. You sit beneath a fig tree and test a few dried reeds from yesterday's haul. You snap one, split another too far down the shaft. Panesi winces. Careful. The pen is patient, but not immortal. Together, you begin the trimming process. First, you peel away the outer layer to reveal the inner core, a pale, fibrous cylinder with surprising strength. You scrape gently, then cut the tip at a diagonal angle, not too sharp, not too blunt. Then, with a fine chisel, you slice a small vertical split down the center of the tip, just enough to create a channel for ink to flow. It's delicate work, like shaping a whisper. Historians still argue whether these pens were invented accidentally. Perhaps someone chewing on a reed noticed it left marks on a scrap of bark. Or perhaps it was an intentional evolution from paintbrushes used in tomb murals. Whatever the origin, the tool changed everything. Reed pens offered control speed and the ability to write with detail far finer than the blunt end of a stick or the swish of a paintbrush. They allowed scribes to write fast enough to keep up with dictation. They made paper scrolls a viable form of mass record keeping. They gave Egypt its written voice. By midday, you've managed to shape 2 usable pens. You dip the tip in water to soften the fibers slightly and test a few strokes on a practice scrap. The ink bleeds slightly. Your slit was too deep, but you adjust. Another stroke. Better. You feel the reed bend and bounce slightly like a brush with a mind of its own. Panesi watches, then nods. Good. That one's a listener. That evening, you tie your new pens into a corded bundle and hang them from a hook by your sleeping mat. They swing gently like wind chimes without sound. Your hands are stained with plant sap. Your fingernails hold tiny specks of soot. You smell like papyrus and wet reed, and you've just made your first real tools of written history. The next day begins before the sun has fully lifted its golden brow over the horizon. You're already seated cross-legged in the courtyard, your newly carved reed pens laid out in a neat row beside a smooth slab of limestone. But today, the focus isn't on the pen, it's on the lifeblood it carries. Ink. Panesi approaches with a ceramic jar clutched carefully in both hands. He kneels beside you with all the reverence of a priest, placing a sacred relic on an altar. The lid comes off with a soft pop, and the scent hits you immediately, smoky, earthy, and slightly sweet. Inside is a thick black paste that glistens faintly in the morning light. This, he says softly, is soot from temple lamps. The gods don't waste anything. You lean in. The paste is dense, almost sticky, made from the residue collected over weeks from flickering oil flames, charred remnants of date pits, animal fat, and flickering prayers. It's been mixed with a touch of gum arabic, tapped from acacia trees, and thinned with water drawn straight from the Nile. You're given a pestle and small stone bowl and instructed to grind your own batch. It's harder than it looks. The soot clumps stubbornly resisting your attempts to smooth it. You add water, then too much water. The mix turns sludgy. Panesi chuckles and shows you how to correct it with a pinch of natron, yes, the same mineral they use to dry out mummies. Multitasking at its finest. Eventually, you find the right consistency, smooth, dark just thick enough to cling to your pen without dripping like soup. You test it with a few strokes on a scrap of limestone. The ink glides out clean and bold. It's alive. Black for life, Panesi murmurs. Black for truth, he gestures to a nearby scroll. Red is for the gods. He's not just being poetic. In ancient Egypt, black ink was the default used for the body of most texts. Red ink made from crushed red ochre marked divine names, headings, and danger. These weren't just aesthetic choices, they were part of the writing's soul. Ink had intention, it had mood. Historians still debate how standardized these recipes were. Some scrolls suggest each temple had its own version mixed to match the rituals they performed or the type of papyrus they used. Others hint at trade in specialty inks, thicker for humid days, lighter for fine script. You wonder if there were scribal rivalries. Oh, you still use date lamp soot. That's so dynasty as ain't. Panesi shows you his ink palette, flat, ceramic, with two wells, one black, one red. He keeps a separate pen for each color stored with the nibs wrapped in linen to keep them moist. He dips carefully, shakes off the excess, and scrawls a test glyph, a feather, the symbol for truth. You try to copy it. Yours looks like a squashed beetle. He pats your shoulder kindly. Later, you carry the ink pot to a nearby temple annex, where walls are covered with practice scripts and half-finished verses. The smell here is stronger, charcoal and myrrh. Scribes come and go, dipping pens, flicking lines, muttering under their breath. One woman shows you how to reconstitute dried ink by adding a drop of date wine and grinding gently with a flat stone. It wakes the words she says. You nod solemnly, trying not to spill the ink on your tunic. A young apprentice is caught adding too much water to the ink pot and gets gently thumped on the head with a reed. Too thin, and the gods won't see it, the master scolds. Too thick, and they'll think you're shouting. You begin to understand ink is not just material, it's medium, memory. It connects the living with the dead, the mundane with the divine. Every drop is a whisper across centuries. You end the day mixing a final batch. You grind slowly, breathing deeply, letting the rhythm of pestle against stone lull you into quiet focus. The black paste forms again, rich, dark, ready, and as you lift your reed pen freshly trimmed and dip it into this ancient ink, you realize you're not just making marks. You're participating in something sacred. You sit on a low stool in the corner of Panesi's writing room, staring at your freshly carved reed pen like it might explode. Your fingers are smudged with ink. Your tunic bears the signs of 2 earlier splatter incidents, and you're still recovering from the tragic moment when you bent a reed too far and snapped it in half mid-stroke. Today is the test. Panesi lays a piece of practice papyrus in front of you. It crackles faintly as it flattens a dry rustle that reminds you this isn't paper as you know it. It's plant fiber pressed and beaten, laced with faint lines and slightly warped edges. It smells faintly of hay and swamp water. Dip, Panesi says, and hold your breath. You do. The tip of your reed pen touches the ink palette and then the papyrus. The first line wobbles like a startled snake. You try again. This time the stroke is too faint. A third try bold but blotchy. Ink pools like nervous sweat. Panesi watches with the expression of someone watching a puppy try to climb stairs. He takes the pen from your hand and demonstrates. The motion is fluid, press, lift, sweep. The reed flexes gently, leaving behind a clean black stroke. He writes the glyph for water 3 rippling lines and hands the pen back to you. Your turn again. You write the same glyph. Sort of. Yours looks more like 3 startled worms fleeing a spilled drink. But Panesi nods, closer. You begin to understand that writing in ancient Egypt isn't just copying lines. It's a performance, a balance of pressure and speed. Too fast and the reed skips, too slow and the ink bleeds. It's a dance, and your reed has 2 left feet. Over time, though, you improve. You learn how to roll the pen slightly as you write, adjusting the ink flow. You experiment with angling the tip steeper for thinner lines, flatter for bold strokes. You even develop a tiny flick at the end of each stroke to keep the lines sharp. Panesi teaches you to test your pen before each use by scribbling on limestone shards ancient scrap paper. These are called ostraca, and they're everywhere. Broken pots, tiles, flakes of discarded building stone, covered with names, shopping lists, temple drafts. The ancient world's post-it notes. Historians still argue whether ostraca were used mostly by scribes or by anyone literate enough to jot down a note. Some of these shards contain tax records, while others have bawdy poems or quick sketches of animals wearing human clothes. One even shows a pharaoh being scolded by a goose. There's no official explanation for that one. You love the feel of pen on stone. It's rougher, more resistant than papyrus, but it sharpens your control. You begin to enjoy the little quirks of each reed, how one might be bouncy, while another glides like a skate on ice. Panesi shows you his collection of favorite pens stored like precious scrolls in a wooden box. One is dyed red, its tip worn to a perfect point. Wrote my wedding contract, he says. Another has a broad nib and stains near the grip, used for copying the Book of the Dead. That one you don't touch. You learn to make small repairs, slicing a fresh tip when one goes blunt, trimming splinters, moistening a dry reed with a damp cloth to coax it back to flexibility. Your kit begins to grow a linen roll for your pens, a tiny blade for carving a string of ostraca with your best strokes. By midday, you're practicing full glyphs. Panesi hands you a tablet with a copy line, life, prosperity, and health. A common greeting, a blessing. You write it once, then again, each time a little straighter, a little smoother. Eventually, you forget to hold your breath. Your hand moves more naturally now. The reed no longer feels like a stick. It feels like an extension of thought. The ink flows like a soft voice. The papyrus no longer crinkles nervously beneath your grip. And then quietly, Panesi says, "Now, write your name." You blink. You hadn't thought about that. But he hands you a guide, a cartouche template oval-shaped and lined with protective symbols. You trace the signs carefully, not perfect, a little crooked, but legible. You've written your name in the script of pharaohs. You sit back, ink on your fingertips, reed pen balanced across your lap. You've scribbled, you've sharpened, you've bled ink, and you're still here, which in the world of ancient Egyptian scribes means you're already doing better than most. It's not long before you're invited into one of the more mysterious corners of the ancient world, the scribe school hidden inside a side hall of the temple. The sun has barely climbed above the horizon when you step inside, the air still cool and dry, and already the room buzzes with quiet focus. Boys, some barely older than 10, sit cross-legged on woven mats, each holding a pen and a scrap of limestone brows furrowed with the intense seriousness only childhood ambition can bring. Panesi walks beside you, nodding approvingly at their work. Future tax collectors, he says with a faint smirk, or priests, or worse, lawyers. You try not to trip over a basket of discarded reed trimmings as he leads you to a small alcove filled with tools, bundles of fresh papyrus, jars of ink sealed with beeswax, and most interesting of all pen cases. Not just any cases, these are long, slim boxes carved from wood or ivory, some wrapped in linen, others in braided leather. A few have sliding compartments, with space for a sharpening blade, and a slot for a sponge to moisten the pen. One even has a tiny compartment that smells faintly of dried mint, a trick to keep ink from going sour in the summer heat. You pick one up. It's warm from the sun and etched with faded hieroglyphs. Panesi gestures at the case with reverence. That belonged to a temple archivist. wrote a full genealogy for the House of Amun. Historians still argue how widespread these pen cases were. Some believe they were reserved for elite scribes, while others suggest even junior students crafted their own from scraps and clay. But here among aspiring writers and future state officials, each boy has one. Some simple, some covered in crude doodles. One has a carved falcon chasing a beetle. Artistry meets personal flair. You settle into the corner as a teacher calls out today's lesson, royal names. Each student practices writing the cartouche, the oval frame for the names of kings and queens. They chant the symbols in unison, their voices rising and falling in sleepy rhythm. Sun, life, Ra, power, eternity. You join in your pen scratching along an ostrakhan. Your strokes are hesitant at first, but Panesi watches with the patience of someone who's seen 100 hands tremble and 100 more find their rhythm. One student nearby shows you his own reed pen, hand-carved with a fishbone grip. So it doesn't slip, he whispers proudly. Another has wrapped the end of his reed with thread an ancient form of ergonomic customization. Soon the class shifts to dictation. The teacher recites a passage from a hymn to Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. You do your best to keep up, but your glyphs fall behind the flow of the words. You look around. The younger scribes are faster than you. They've trained for years after all, and they do this daily scribbling poems, reports, letters, and spells. Some will go on to serve in the palace, others in courts, temples, or libraries. Panesi leans over. Speed comes later, precision first. You keep going. Midday arrives with the scent of lentils and flatbread wafting through the open door. The scribes scatter for their meal, but you linger exploring the walls. Etched into the plaster are faint inscriptions, notes from past students, little jokes, bits of advice. One reads, "Sharpen your pen before your tongue." Beside it, someone has drawn a tiny duck wearing a crown. You chuckle. Even 3,000 years ago, doodling in the margins was a thing. As the day winds down, you help Panesi gather the pen cases and lay them in a row for cleaning. Each one tells a story. The cracked one, wrapped tightly in linen, belonged to a boy who studied hieratic script but never mastered hieroglyphs. The one shaped like a boat was carried by a temple scribe who chronicled river festivals. These aren't just storage boxes, they're time capsules, a reminder that even the simplest tools can hold echoes of lives lived, dreams, dreamt lessons learned, one squiggly stroke at a time. You walk home. As the sun sinks behind the palm groves, your reed pens tucked inside a leather case you made earlier that week. The flap is uneven, the cord is fraying, but it's yours. And inside it are not just pens, but the beginning of your story. The next morning, Panesi hands you a reed that's sharper than the others. Its tip glints slightly in the sun, soaked overnight in water and trimmed to a clean, confident angle. Today, he says, we write with meaning. You're seated beside him in the temple's shaded scriptoria, a long, breezy chamber where walls are lined with scroll racks and low desks. There's an expectant hush in the air, like something sacred is about to be whispered. On the table before you is a fresh strip of papyrus anchored with polished stones, and beside it, 2 ink palettes, one black, one red. Panesi lights a bit of incense and nods. Let your hand be steady, your reed respectful, because today you're not just copying prayers or writing your name for the 50th time. Today you're attempting to write like the gods. You begin with a simple glyph, a feather again, the symbol for Ma'at or truth. It's elegant in its curves, and Panesi insists that the stroke be light, airy, graceful. Your first try looks like a broken palm frond, but you try again and again until it finally glides. Then comes a lion, the glyph for strength, a single sweeping form that balances aggression in poise. You hesitate. Panesi reminds you writing is not drawing, it is breathing. You exhale and let the pen move. The lion paces across the page. You dip your pen into the red well. It's time to write a divine name. You choose Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, the ibis-headed deity who legend says invented writing by watching the patterns of the stars and the speech of birds. As the ink flows, Panesi's tone changes. He speaks softer, slower. Each name is a doorway. You do not knock unless you mean to enter. Historians still debate how scribes viewed their own power. Some argue they were humble recorders of sacred knowledge. Others believe they felt chosen gatekeepers to divine speech. Panesi leans toward the latter. He doesn't say he's magic, but he smiles like someone who knows more than he writes. You follow his lead as he composes a blessing for a temple offering. May the scent of incense rise to the nostrils of the great God, and may he grant life strength and health. Each glyph flows into the next, like a river current, loops, hooks, curves, all bound by rhythm. Your reed makes a soft scratching sound on the papyrus, like the brushing of wind against linen. Then suddenly your pen catches a splintered tip. Panesi doesn't scold. He hands you a sharpening blade. Even a priest rewraps his sandals, he says. You shave the edge gently, moisten it, and try again. As the day warms, your papyrus fills with blessings and titles. Daughter of the sun, master of the horizon, the one who opens the way. Each phrase carries power, authority, not just names, but identities. To write them is to speak them, and to speak them is to summon them. You're shown a rare scroll from the temple archive, its surface crowded with elaborate ceremonial script. Every god named in red, every prayer aligned with precise spatial balance, not too top-heavy, not too wide. Panesi points to the layout. The gods read too. They do not like crooked pages. You smile, half joking, half in awe. It's hard to say where superstition ends and reverence begins. But in this room, surrounded by sacred names and carefully chosen colors, you don't dare ask too many questions. Later, a novice scribe panics over smudging the name of Osiris. He dabs at it with trembling fingers, muttering apologies. Panesi takes the scroll gently and covers the spot with a patch of fresh papyrus. We do not cross out the gods, he says. Instead, you try again. As twilight nears your reed pen, is stained at the base, soft at the tip, and a little warped from use. But it's still writing. You finish the day with a short hymn, one line you copy again and again. Words are the breath of the heart, shaped by the reed. You set down your pen, your fingers tingle, your back aches, but you feel oddly light, like something has flowed through you, not just from you. Panacea packs away the ink palettes and scrolls, and you help him wrap his pens in linen. As he places the bundle in a wooden case, he says quietly, "Writing like a god isn't about knowing every sign." He closes the lid. It's about meaning every stroke. The morning is hushed and a little solemn. You can feel it in the air. Even the birds seem to sing in a more respectful tone. Today, Panacea doesn't greet you with a smile. Instead, he simply gestures for you to follow. You do, walking in step behind him as he leads you through narrow alleyways of sandstone and sun-warmed brick until the temple walls rise tall ahead, casting long shadows like ancient arms. You're not going to the writing hall. You're going to the embalming chamber, not for a body, for a coffin. Inside, the air smells thick with cedar oil incense and the earthy sweetness of resins. The chamber is lit by tiny oil lamps that flicker against the gold and blue painted walls. At the center lies a freshly crafted wooden coffin, its surface pale clean, unmarked, not for long. Today you're helping scribe the opening of the mouth spell, the ritual text meant to ensure that the deceased may speak, eat, and breathe in the afterlife. Panacea hands you a slim reed pen with a precise, sharp nib and a small ink palette, black and red. You kneel before the coffin panel, careful not to smudge the surface with your robes. The wood is smooth, but it absorbs ink quickly. Each stroke must be deliberate. No mistakes, no do-overs, not here. You begin with black ink, outlining the figure of the deceased, arms outstretched, feet together, gaze forward. Then you move to the symbols, the eye of Horus, the feather of Ma'at, the bread loaf, the staff, the lotus. Each glyph breathes something essential into the spell. Panacea watches closely. "This isn't art," he whispers. "It's instruction." Indeed, the opening of the mouth was not decorative. It was functional. A guide for the soul, a set of metaphysical buttons to be pressed in the right order. The correct ink, the correct pen, the correct hand. You reach the name of the deceased and switch to red ink. Always red for names, for emphasis, for power. The ochre pigment glows faintly in the lamplight, almost as if it's still alive. There's debate among scholars about whether these spells were personalized or copied verbatim. Some tombs feature entire custom lines, unique prayers never found elsewhere. Others reuse standard templates. Either way, the hand that wrote them, your hand today, had to be steady, faithful, and focused. Halfway through the ritual spell, your reed splinters slightly. You freeze. Panacea silently hands you a replacement. Not a word is spoken. The silence feels as ancient as the ink. You pick up where you left off. The text continues with invocations to gods. "O Anubis, open his mouth with the adze of iron. Let him speak in the hall of judgment. Let him taste the bread of the blessed." You can't help but feel a flicker of weight behind the words, as though they're pressing into the wood more than your pen does. Panacea says nothing, but you can see the pride in the corner of his eye. The final line is a circle of protection, a loop of glyphs repeated like a verbal seal. You draw it carefully, finish the final curve, sit back. It is done. Panacea leans forward, inspects the panel, and nods. "He'll speak again," he says. You help pack up the ink jars, washing the nibs of each pen with a cloth soaked in perfumed water. Your fingertips are stained red and black. You look down at your hands. They look older, not from age, but from having touched something old. As you exit the chamber, the sun hits your face bright and harsh. It takes a moment to adjust. You feel changed, quieted. Later that afternoon, you find yourself practicing the same spell on limestone shards. It's a favorite exercise now, not just for the complexity of the script, but for the gravity of the message. Let the mouth open. Let the name be spoken. The idea that words could grant life after death, it feels familiar now. Comforting even. And with every stroke of your reed, you leave behind something more than ink. You leave intention. Your hands are cramped, your eyes a bit sore, and your reed pens are fraying from use. But Panesi doesn't believe in days off, not when a royal decree is due. You're summoned, well more like firmly requested, to the scribal hall inside the provincial governor's estate. The sun is already blazing overhead by the time you arrive, and inside the writing chamber it's somehow hotter. Half a dozen scribes are hunched over scrolls, furiously copying lines, while a court official paces in sandals that slap angrily with each step. He holds a scroll that no one wants to rewrite, but everyone has to. This must be clean, he barks. It bears the seal of the pharaoh. You're handed a draft copy of the decree. It concerns grain distribution land allotments and a stern reminder from the crown about tax responsibilities. Panesi gives you a look that says, try not to blot this one. You dip your pen in black ink and begin. The sound in the room is hypnotic, soft scratching reed on papyrus, like a field of grass whispering in the wind. Every scribe works at a different pace. One is slow but flawless. Another is fast with ink that occasionally pools in dangerous blobs. You find your rhythm somewhere in between. Each character flows into the next, and you start to see the decree take shape, not as words, but as structure, like a pyramid built from strokes and curves. You learn to anticipate the turns in phrasing, the way certain royal names must be underlined in red, the formulaic openings that begin every decree. In year X of the reign of the son of Ra, the living god, the mighty bull, your pen catches once. You freeze. A scribe beside you slides a sharpening knife your way without looking. Everyone here has been through this. By midday, your reed is soft, your tongue dry, and your scroll nearly complete. You pause to stretch and glance around. The wall is lined with clay seal molds, sun discs, falcons' thrones. The final copy will be rolled tied with linen and stamped. The stamp means it's real, but first it must be perfect. You copy the governor's name with careful precision, switching to red for the divine title he insists on using. Historians still debate whether scribes had freedom in layout or if everything followed a master template. Judging by how the official circles like a vulture, you're betting on strict templates. Someone sneezes, everyone flinches, ink smudges are unforgivable. Still, even in the stress, there's a kind of strange camaraderie here. You notice how one scribe hums quietly, while he writes how another taps his reed 3 times before starting a line. Tiny rituals for focus, or maybe luck, your own ritual breathing out slowly before every red glyph. The official returns to inspect the progress. His eyes sweep over your scroll. No frown, no barked correction, just a nod. Panacea leans in later and murmurs, "You survived the ink rush. That's your initiation." You return to the temple that evening and lay out your pen kit like it's holy. Your favorite reed is worn down to a stub. You kiss the nib just to be safe and tuck it gently into the case. That night you sit beside the Nile under a sky spilling with stars and wonder how many royal decrees have crossed this river, how many voices rode across ink and fiber to shout from palace to field, "This is the law," and how many scribes, tired, ink-stained, proud, wrote their names in the margins where no one would see. You decide to do the same. A tiny mark, a hidden symbol, nothing more, but it's there because your pen now carries not just words, but a voice, yours. You wake to the wind scraping dust against your doorway, like nature herself is practicing hieroglyphs with sand. Outside, the sky is hazy, the air dry, and your first inhale tastes like powdered pottery. The ink in your jar has dried at the edges. The reed pens in your case feel brittle, and as you crunch across the courtyard, you realize today is a pen repair day. Panacea is already seated at the sharpening stone, muttering gently to his most temperamental pen, which he's nicknamed the Crooked One. His other reeds are laid out like surgical tools. Some have split tips. Others are discolored from ink or curled slightly from heat. Yours, tucked in your satchel, are in similar shape, weathered from work, tired from long scrolls, and sweaty palms. You begin with reshaping. The stone is smooth and cool to the touch, a rare contrast to everything else today. You angle the tip of your pen against it, dragging it down with slow precision, rotating slightly with each pass. Too much pressure, and the nib snaps. Too little, and it barely reshapes. Every pen has its own voice. The thin ones whisper, Panacea says. The thick ones shout. You glance at one you'd forgotten about, in the bottom of your pouch, wide, splintered, angry looking, definitely a shouter. The heat grows worse. Flies buzz low over the ink jars. Your hand sweats as you wrap a cloth around the pen's base to keep your grip. Scribes across Egypt had to cope with this exact struggle. There was no such thing as climate control, only shaded courtyards, damp linen wraps, and an ever-present fear of sand blowing into your ink. You remember one of Panacea's sayings. You don't write in Egypt. You wrestle with the elements and convince them to let you write. Historians still argue how scribes managed to maintain clean scrolls in such a harsh climate. Some theories suggest using damp cloths across desks. Others believe certain ink recipes were adjusted seasonally, thicker in dry months, thinner in humid ones. There's even speculation that some scribes coated their papyrus sheets in faint layers of oil to resist dust. You try the oil trick. It smells like old olives, but it seems to work. Still, you battle your environment. You read phrase again after 5 lines. Your ink thickens within minutes of exposure. You try to shade your work with your own body, but the wind lifts the edges of your papyrus like it's eager to read ahead. Panacea shows you a trick, a small heavy bead tied to the corner of the page to keep it in place. You fashion your own from a scrap of linen and a pebble. It works. Barely. Then the grit storm comes. You dash inside, Scroll tucked to your chest, ink palette in hand. Inside your nose and ears are filled with dust. Everything smells like stone. You sit against the wall, panting the scroll, miraculously unblemished. Panesi walks in behind you, brushing sand from his beard, like this happens twice a week. It probably does. After the storm passes, you step out to assess the damage. The reeds in your drying bundle are buried. You rescue what you can, then begin the long task of cleaning each one. A wet cloth, a soft comb. You remember every scribe in this land faced the same ritual. Not just writing, but maintenance. Rebuilding your tools as often as you used them. One pen is beyond saving. You give it a small burial, wrapped in a sliver of papyrus, and placed beneath the fig tree. Panesi sees, says nothing, but nods with approval. Some pens deserve rest. You end the day back at the sharpening stone. One last pass. One final test stroke, thin, clean, steady. The pen still writes, and in this land of shifting sands and stubborn wind, that's a small miracle worth celebrating. By now, you're getting comfortable with the ink-stained hands and reed trimmings underfoot. But today, Panesi pushes your curiosity further with a glint in his eye and a phrase that feels like a secret. There's more than black and red. You blink. Black and red have carried you through spells, taxes, and royal decrees. What more could there be? He gestures to a row of ceramic jars tucked neatly behind a carved wooden panel. You hadn't even noticed them before, perhaps hidden intentionally, or perhaps just forgotten in your reverence for the traditional tools. He opens one, an inside powder, the color of crushed turquoise. Blue frit, he says, for the gods' jewelry, for truth, for sky. He opens another deep green, malachite, ground fine, used for rebirth vegetation, sometimes eyeliner. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. A good scribe works in beauty and function. He leads you to the mixing station, a flat stone pallet, some clean water, a strip of linen to blot excess moisture. He spoons out a pinch of the blue frit and grinds it with a pestle. It resists at first, chunky and rough, but eventually becomes fine, as flour and glimmers faintly in the light. Water is added, then a drop of gum arabic to bind it. You stir it with a reed and watch the color bloom. You test it on a limestone shard. The line you draw is vibrant, almost electric, a flash of sky on stone. Used in titles, Panesi murmurs, when the gods must see their names in brilliance. Historians still argue whether these pigments were reserved only for tomb art and ceremonial texts, or whether they found more common use in private scrolls. Some believe colors denoted hierarchy: black for the mortal red, for divine order, blue and green for the unseen world. Others suggest it was simply about materials. Blue frit was expensive after all, requiring specific heating methods and ingredients. If you had it, you used it sparingly. You try the green, next cool and calming. It glides differently than the black ink, thicker, a bit chalkier. You write the glyph for life in green and stare at it for a long time. It feels alive. Then there's yellow, made from orpiment. Dangerous in large doses, but breathtaking in small ones. You're warned not to touch your face after using it. It brightens the sun disk, Panesi says, painting the circle glyph with a reverent hand. Some pigments are less cooperative. White ink made from gypsum tends to crack. Brown from burnt ochre smudges easily, unless fixed with extra gum. But each has its place in the visual harmony of ancient Egyptian writing. You find yourself mesmerized, not just by the colors, but by what they mean. Each shade carries not just hue, but intention. Blue to elevate a sentence, green to invoke eternity, red to underline the names of gods. Writing isn't just communication, it's painting with purpose. A young temple artist passes by and nods at your palette. Better to make Osiris smile, he says with a wink, and keeps walking. Later, you're invited to help copy a hymn where each stanza begins in a different color. The first line in black, the next in red, then alternating blue and green for the poetic invocations. The scroll looks like a garden in full bloom. Your reed pen handles the transition well, though it needs more cleaning between dips. The colors have different consistencies. You learn to adjust pressure, subtly changing your hand movement depending on the ink's personality. You begin to see color not as decoration, but as emphasis, a rhythm, a tone. At sunset, you lay your pen down beside a palette that now looks like an artist's dream spots of jewel-toned residue, streaks of life smeared gently across the stone. You wipe your fingers now freckled with blue and green and exhale slowly. Tomorrow you'll go back to black and red, but for tonight your writing glows with color, the way it might have for pharaohs, for gods, for those who believed words weren't just read, they were seen. The moon is high and the streets are quiet when you find yourself wandering behind the granary wall, drawn by the faint flicker of torchlight and a barely stifled giggle. You turn the corner and stop. Two young scribes crouch beside a stone block, one of them holding a reed pen, the other peering around like a lookout. You squint at the wall behind them and see it fresh ink strokes small, hurried, and unmistakably mischievous. Someone is writing graffiti. The scribe dips his pen into a travel jar and scrawls another line. You step closer and read it under your breath. He who withholds beer shall suffer ants in his sandals. You snort. They jump. One of them nearly drops his ink jar. But when they realize you're laughing, not scolding, they relax and make room. We keep it light, one of them whispers. Too many funerary spells make a man need jokes. They offer you the pen. You hesitate. Panesi would absolutely disapprove. But then again, isn't this just another kind of storytelling? You write your own line. Even a cat can teach a priest humility. They nod impressed. You spend the rest of the hour adding tiny cartoons, stick figure pharaohs, chasing runaway scrolls, a temple cat sprawled on a stack of papyrus, a priest tripping over his own sandals. The wall becomes a nighttime masterpiece of quiet rebellion. Historians still argue whether graffiti like this was frowned upon or tolerated as long as it didn't deface sacred sites. Archaeologists have found poems, jokes, satirical drawings, even love notes scrawled on walls, stones, and broken pottery. One fragment reads, "Beware the scribe who eats garlic before prayer." You can't help but think these scribes weren't just record keepers. They were observers, commentators, chroniclers of not just kings and gods, but of gossip, laziness, awkward crushes, and flat-out silliness. And in a world where writing was sacred, Choosing to write something trivial or cheeky was its own form of power. One of the boys pulls out a tiny scrap of limestone, an ostrakhan no bigger than your palm, and shows you his personal notebook. It's filled with miniature sketches and half-finished sentences. When I saw her at the well, the overseer walks like a goose in sandals. If the ink runs, it's the gods laughing. You nod solemnly. That one's definitely true. They ask what you're doing here at this hour. You shrug and say something vague about insomnia and pen sharpening, which in fairness isn't entirely untrue. The torch burns low, casting shadows that make your graffiti dance. You help them pack up their supplies, careful not to leave any ink jars behind. Even rogue scribes have standards. As you walk back through the empty streets, you can't help but smile. The sacred halls of the temple taught you reverence. But this back alley wall, it taught you freedom. The pen, you now realize, doesn't just serve the gods or the state. It serves laughter, curiosity, whispers in the dark, a voice in the margins. By the time the market buzzes to life the next morning, you're already haggling over a bundle of imported reeds that smell faintly of river clay and foreign soil. The merchant, a barrel-chested man with sun-creased eyes and a braided beard, claims they come from Nubia, tougher, longer-lasting, better ink retention. You raise a skeptical brow. He grins and throws in a free pen case, made from crocodile skin, he says. You sniff it. Smells more like goat. Still, you buy them. Panesi meets you near the temple fountain, already unrolling a scroll he's halfway through transcribing. You show him the new reeds. He inspects one and tests the tip with a practiced flick against his thumb. Too springy, he mutters. You'll need to temper it. You soak one in warm water, trim the end, and let it dry under the midday sun while Panesi explains the world of scribal tradings, from Byblos brushes, from the Levant pigments from Kush, and even powdered gold from far-off mines brought on camelback through blistering deserts. Historians still debate how much local scribes relied on imports. Some workshops proudly used Nile-grown reeds and native minerals, swearing by the purity of homegrown goods. Others collected foreign tools, like treasure, convinced that a brush from the East or blue frit from Syria carried a better stroke. Panesi is somewhere in the middle. Good hands can write with a burnt stick. He says testing your Nubian reed on a broken ostrakhan, it writes, well, crisp, bold. Maybe the merchant wasn't exaggerating. You spend the day sampling foreign dyes, deep crimson from crushed madder root, silvery gray from crushed snail shell, and a dazzling ultramarine that's so bright it looks unnatural, probably because it is. Too much flair, Panesi mutters. It screams, but it's beautiful. You experiment with mixing colors, adding red ochre to the madder root to make a richer rust tone. You sketch a falcon in black, then outline its wings in green malachite. A scribe passing by pauses, nods, and adds a splash of yellow to the sun disk above it. Collaboration, it turns out, isn't just allowed, it's encouraged. In the temple's art annex, scribes and painters work side by side, sharing tools, arguing over angles, praising one another's penmanship with the solemnity of scholars and the sass of siblings. One older man with trembling hands and a voice like falling sand shows you a pen with a gold-wrapped tip, an heirloom passed down 2 generations. It still remembers the hand of my father, he says, running his thumb along the shaft. You're not sure if he means it literally or metaphorically. Either way, you nod. Later, you meet a traveling trader who offers you something unexpected, a pen with a hollow reed shaft and a sponge inside an early attempt at ink storage. You test it. It leaks. Badly. But the idea is there. You scribble a note beside it. Ink holding pen needs thicker stopper. Panesi watches with amusement. Innovation isn't always improvement, he says, but it keeps you curious. You agree. You've come to realize that the pen isn't just a tool, it's a constant work in progress, an evolving companion that adapts with each scroll, each season, each scribe. And the marketplace reflects that scribes here don't just buy, they share. They barter recipes, test pigments, trade reed cuttings, and even exchange scroll fragments with samples of their finest lettering. It's a culture of ink and inquiry. You leave the market with a pouch full of experimental supplies and a head full of ideas. That night, by the light of a single oil lamp, you try again with the leaky sponge pen wrapping a sliver of waxed linen around the tip. It holds for a few lines before dribbling a slow, sad streak across the page. You laugh, clean it up, and write a note. Try goat bladder reservoir next. Maybe you'll start a new trend. Maybe you'll just stain your tunic again. But one thing is clear. This pen, like you, is still learning. The day begins with the sound of hammers tapping stone, not construction, but ornamentation. You arrive at the great colonnade of the temple, where the gods don't just dwell in ideas, but in images carved deeply into the walls and painted in layers of sacred color. Panesi waits for you beneath a massive lotus-shaped column, surrounded by pigments, scrolls, and a group of artisans in linen smocks, already at work. Today your pen won't just write, it will draw the divine. A high priest approaches with a half-rolled draft, the planned decoration for one of the inner columns. At the center, the goddess Hathor surrounded by offerings, with prayers and praises inscribed in flowing script around her. Panesi explains your task in a tone that mixes gravity with reverence. The pen delivers the soul of the image. You take your seat on a low stone bench and unroll the thin scroll bearing the design's first draft. You dip your reed into a palette of red ochre and begin outlining the hieroglyphs that will crown the goddess's name. Each stroke must align precisely with the carved guidelines etched faintly into the stone. It's harder than you expect. The surface curves, the light shifts. Your pen drags slightly on the stone's texture. You adjust your grip angle, your wrist, and steady your breath. The line smooths. Artisans beside you are doing the same, but with brushes and chisels. The painter fills in the curve of Hathor's cheek. The stonecutter deepens a lotus stem, and your pen dances between them, marking the words that breathe life into the image. Lady of turquoise eye of Ra, mistress of the West. Historians still argue whether scribes working in temples were considered full artists or simply translators of Holy Script. But watching this collaboration unfold, it's obvious the roles are inseparable. Each stroke complements the others. Every detail matters. You're handed a new color lapis blue to mark the sky symbols. Your pen trembles slightly. You remember to chant the breath count Panesi taught you: inhale, for precision, exhale for grace. A child apprentice nearby hums while mixing green pigment from malachite. He gestures at your work and whispers, "Don't forget the breath line. Without it, the name can't speak." You add the line. Later, you're asked to help re-ink a faded inscription on a lintel above the entrance. You climb a small scaffold, heart pounding more from nerves than height, and press your reed to the stone. Your hand is steadier now, confident, not because you're fearless, but because you understand. These aren't just decorations, they're anchors, markers that guide the spirit, symbols that ensure the gods are known, invoked, and perhaps most importantly, remembered. At midday, a priest blesses the pigments, wafting incense over the palettes. Everyone pauses. Even the chiselers set down their tools. The smell of myrrh and cinnamon fills the air. You close your eyes, and for a moment everything is quiet, except the gentle breeze brushing across the temple columns like a whisper from the past. When you resume work, the sunlight strikes your scroll just right, illuminating the edges of your strokes. They glow faintly against the stone. By evening, the column's inscription is complete. The goddess stands tall, smiling her eternal smile. Around her swirl the words you helped place. Panesi inspects the final product, his hand hovering just above the paint, not quite touching. She is pleased, he says softly. You pack away your pens, now stained in more colors than you can count. Your fingertips are green and red. Your tunic bears streaks of blue. You look like a scroll that's been walked through a storm, and still you smile, because for the first time, your pen has done more than write. It has revealed. Today there is no conversation, no market haggling, no chants echoing off temple walls, only silence and the soft crackle of papyrus being unrolled. Panesi leads you to a quiet chamber deep within the temple compound, its entrance guarded not by soldiers or priests, but by the stillness that surrounds sacred tasks. The air is cooler here, heavier, with incense and centuries of breath held in reverence. In the center of the room rests a nearly completed Book of the Dead scroll, longer than a man is tall and older than most of the walls that surround it. Panesi gently uncovers the section you'll be working on. His fingers brush the papyrus like its skin. This isn't just a copy job, this is the inscription, a text meant to guide the soul of a deceased noble through the afterlife. And now you will add your strokes to it. You dip your reed in black ink, heart thudding. The first line you trace begins with words spoken by the Osiris, true of voice, a formula meant to affirm the soul's worthiness in the afterlife. Your pen scratches gently, but your hand holds steady. You've written these phrases before, but never when they mattered this much. Each glyph is more than a letter. Each one is a spell, a tool, a charm. The papyrus before you is not just a document, it's a lifeline, a map to eternity. Panesi points out a segment you'll be assisting with a passage about the soul's journey through the hall of Ma'at, where the heart is weighed against the feather of truth. You've heard this story dozens of times, but writing it now feels different. Personal. You begin with care, crafting each symbol as though it were being carved in gold. You pause at the glyph for IB heart. You know what comes next. Panesi hands you a narrow reed and switches your ink to red. You write the name of the deceased, slowly, with intention, with breath. Historians still argue over whether scribes who copied funerary texts truly believed in their magic, or if it was simply tradition ritualized memory. But standing here, your hands ink stained and your pulse slowing with each line, it's hard not to believe. You copy the next section, a protective spell invoking Thoth to help the deceased navigate the perils of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. You add a prayer against the devourer of hearts, a creature part crocodile, part lion, who waits to consume the unworthy. You silently hope your lines are neat enough to ward her off. Across the scroll pens unfold the soul, kneeling before 42 judges, speaking the negative confession: I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not polluted the river. Each statement a defense, a hope, a plea. You add a final benediction flanked by the glyphs for eternal life. Then you lay down your pen. Panesi checks your work. He doesn't speak, only nods, once his expression unreadable but respectful. You help him carefully roll the scroll. It will be wrapped in linen and placed within the coffin, nestled beside amulets and charms. The pen you used today, it won't be kept. It will be burned, offered as part of the funeral rites. Its job, like the soul's body, complete. You watch the reed crackle in the fire that evening. A thin wisp of smoke rises, curling like script in the sky. You think about all the names you've written, and the ones that will never be spoken again, and how every word you've placed today wasn't for the living, but for someone trying to keep living somewhere beyond the veil. Your fingers twitch phantom movements, chasing a pen no longer there. Tomorrow you'll sharpen a new reed, but tonight you sleep, knowing your ink has touched eternity. You sit beside Panesi one final time, the two of you shaded beneath a faded linen canopy. In the courtyard, your reed pens fanned out like tools of a magician or a carpenter or both. The sun is low, painting everything in soft amber. The papyrus before you is blank, clean, quiet, expectant. Write whatever you want, Panesi says. You blink. Anything. He nods. You've written for gods, for governors, for the dead. Today, write for yourself. And so you do. At first, your hand hesitates. What do you say to the gods, or to time, or to nothing in particular, when the only prompt is your own breath? You begin simply with a glyph for life, then peace, then bread because you're hungry, then cat because one is curled beside your leg. Panesi chuckles as you add a tiny fish with exaggerated fins, but then the strokes begin to flow in earnest. You write a line about the first pen you carved, how it split and bled ink like a startled grape. You add the glyph for learning, and one for mistake, and then one for joy. You write about dust storms and crooked nibs, about your first scroll and your first failure. You draw the symbol for laughing, which Panesi tells you isn't official, but you add it anyway. A tiny open mouth next to a wine jug and a dancing monkey. Historians still argue whether scribes ever wrote personal reflections, or if their lives were strictly professional, measured in lines copied and decrees obeyed. But you know the truth: every pen carried a piece of its writer hidden in the pressure of a line, the curve of a glyph, the choice to use green ink for a name instead of red. Panesi unrolls one of his oldest scroll's edges, browned corners, frayed. Inside the margin is a single sentence written in childishly wide strokes. I hope the gods read slowly. You grin. Together you inscribe a closing line to your scroll using both bleak and red ink. Panesi nods in approval. He adds his own mark beside yours, a small falcon glyph. For speed, he says. For flight. You carefully store your pens in your now well-worn case. Each one is different, some elegant, some stubby. One still faintly glittered with blue frit dust from the day you tried to paint the sky. You close the lid. That evening, you walk the riverbank alone, the breeze soft against your arms, your hands still faintly stained from ink. You stop to rest beside a sycamore and pull out your last reed, testing its point on a flat stone, and you write one final message. The reed remembers. The ink carries. The name remains. You set the reed into the water where it floats for a moment, then begins to drift slowly, gently into the current of the Nile, just like every story, just like every soul. Now, as the night settles softly around you and the wind quiets its breath, let the sounds of history begin to fade. Let your shoulders loosen and your jaw unclench as the last strokes of your imaginary reed pen fall still. You've traveled far tonight across dusty courtyards and sunlit markets, into temple halls and hush-filled chambers where names held more power than stone. You've mixed ink from flame-carved pens, from reed and whispered spells, in lines as steady as a river's curve. You've watched your words stretch across scrolls, across walls, across time itself. And through it all, your pen, simple, sacred, carried not just meaning, but memory. So let your breathing slow now. Let the pulse in your fingers steady. In your mind's eye, see the final sheet of papyrus rolling closed. Your name tucked safely inside your words, resting beside ancient kings and everyday scribes, all part of the same quiet chorus. No more red ink, no more chipped nibs, no more crooked glyphs, only rest, only silence, only the soft ripple of the Nile under moonlight, and the knowledge that once, just once, you wrote like the gods. Good night, traveler of time.